Tēnā koe te rangatira te minita mo tō kōrero ki a tātou. Thank you very much, Minister, for that. It was interesting in your kōrero, all I heard was you're paying for it, so thank you. We appreciate you. I know there'll be a lot of questions, and it has been asked if we do a Q&A. We've decided no, that I'm sure each and every one of you will have questions for Tā Tipene and of course our Minister here today. Please ask those questions, but be prepared for the answer. So don't be, what's the word? Don't be disheartened by the answer. Just take it on board, hold on to it. Again, like any complaints, put it in your pocket, take it away with you. Kia ora. We're going to carry on, ladies and gentlemen. We're going into our session 2, Murihiku Regeneration, the purpose, the priorities and the focus of action. Ladies and gentlemen, we're blessed to have one of our speakers, Mr. Michael Stevens, aka Mr. Bluff Matthew McConaughey, who's joined us today. You like that one, eh? There's my first complaint. Yeah. Talking to about the Rickstream foci. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium Mr. Michael Stevens. Kia ora.
Ko wai te parara, ko wai te kuaka, a ti hei mauri ora. Kia ora anō i te whare. Of course, on the marae and the paipai, you tend to put your younger, deficient and impertinent speakers up first and let the greyer heads, I was going to say grey heads, greyer heads, rise after them and apologise for all of those mishaps. So I don't know who put today's batting order together, but on your head be it. Now, of course, a lot of people and a number of institutions have made this Wānanga possible. Success has many parents. I do not propose to individually acknowledge you all, but I would like to single out a few of you in my opening remarks. Firstly, I thank Rio Tinto for announcing in July 2020 that New Zealand Aluminium Smelters Limited intends to cease operations at Tiwai Point. This event and these important conversations we're having here simply would not be happening had Rio not made that decision. Now, of course, given the uptick in global aluminium prices, the smelter's closure, currently scheduled for late 2024, may not be a given. Regardless, Rio Tinto remains engaged in ongoing site investigations and closure plan development, and I further thank the company for involving us at Tūrunaka o Awarua in these processes. Secondly, I'd like to express my gratitude to Te Runanga o Ngaitahu, specifically our CEO, Arihia Bennett, but also Rakihia Tau, Jackie Kane and Mike Pōhio for their sustained support of ngā papatapu runanga or Murihiku as we think our way through the challenges and opportunities, economic, social, cultural and environmental, that the smelter's closure presents us with as an iwi, as a region, as a nation. Next, I'd like to thank the Richardson Group for its own interest in these questions and its growing understanding of and engagement with Ngaitahu at both local and central levels. Now, special thanks in this respect are due to Scott and Jocelyn O'Donnell and also Albert Brantley, the chairman of the board. The synergies between our values and aspirations is increasingly apparent to us all, as is the potential, I think, for mutual advantage in ways that benefit this province that we both hold so dear. Scott, we very much valued seeing you on our marae earlier this year. We hope we might see you again there soon, and we appreciate you and Jocelyn for opening the doors to your own wharenui here today. My penultimate hat doff goes to Bluff's other diamond in the rough, the indefatigable Terry Nicholas. To paraphrase Michael Joseph Savage, you may have made mistakes in your time, Terry, but you have made other things too. And this Wānanga is a wonderful testament to those other things. And plenty of people within and beyond Awaroa are grateful to you for those efforts. We see you and we see the better angels of your nature. Finally, I wanted to pay another short tribute to the Honourable Dr. Megan Woods for her consistent championing of Ngāi Tahu and the South Island, whose interests are interdependent, as she goes about her unenviable work within the Molesworth Street Triangle, where, as Tā Tīpini likes to remind us, good ideas go to die. Enough of the pleasantries. I have a misanthropic reputation to uphold. On that note, I should say at this point, I decided against preparing slides today because we all know power corrupts, and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. Right then, I want you all to imagine a southern Murihiku that is fundamentally different from the one we currently occupy. This alternative Murihiku utilises one of the region's natural resources. It utilises our close proximity to the Australian continent. And it does this to produce a global energy commodity. Now this future Murihiku sells this, this alternative Murihiku sells this global energy commodity to industrial markets throughout the world so that we may pay our way in the world and improve ourselves materially. I want you to imagine that this globally sought energy source is produced by marrying imported technology and imported hardware, imported capital, with Ngāi Tahu environmental knowledge, Ngāi Tahu investment, and Ngāi Tahu labour. Now this creates new jobs for our whānau, but it also enhances pre-existing lifeways, pre-existing culture. And at an iwi level, beyond the Murihiku centre of the universe, this exercise shifts our investment focus, our tribal-wide investment focus, and indeed many of our people, many of our key individuals and whānau, away from Canterbury and south into Murihiku. Now that decision to do that, that tribal-wide decision to tumble south, is subsequently validated from both economic and risk management perspectives. In developing this energy source for export, groups of new migrants are attracted to Murihiku from all corners of the world. Their new skills, their new ideas, their new genes reshape southern Ngāi Tahu, but leave us intact. The upshot of this is a culturally diverse but meritocratic industry and workplaces. The energy commodity to which I refer is loaded onto ships at Bluff, Awaroa, driving population growth at that port. And all of this is conceived of immediately before and developed during a pandemic. What I have just described to you is not a thought experiment, or rather it is not just a thought experiment. It is in fact a description of Murihiku in the 1830s. The natural resource was whales. The resultant energy commodity was whale oil. This is the stuff that lit the streets of London, Paris, Boston, Bremen. This is the stuff that greased the wheels of the Industrial Revolution and spun the belts made out of bison hides off the Great Plains. The imported technology to these coasts included clinker dinghies, oars, sails, harpoons, tripods, wet weather clothing, oil lamps, weatherboard houses with internal fireplaces, camp ovens, te mea. Ngāi Tahu knowledge of weather, of tides, of whale migration routes was the necessary software to make it all work. Now these new jobs that existed on these whaling stations, these whaling stations, they were not British bridgeheads, as James Belich asserts. They operated in a Māori cultural world. Even so, it was by such means that our proximate tipuna were introduced to capitalism and new consumer products. It is by such means that they were introduced to wage labouring and the operation of credit, with which they purchased Chinese tea and Indian tobacco, among other things. As several historians before me have noted, this all reshaped Ngāi Tahu family patterns, patterns of labour allocation, production and consumption. But it rewarded our underlying maritime inclinations and it amplified earlier activities, especially inshore fishing and the seasonal titi harvest. Bigger boats meant bigger hauls of mutton birds. This Ngāi Tahu reset, as we might term it, and the southern shift in focus for the iwi had an impact beyond individual whānau. Our earlier economic system, which was centred on kaiapoi pā, the sort of entrepot of kaiapoi pā, was irrevocably changed. And a good thing it was. By drawing several of our key rangatira south to Ruapuki Island, we were able to acquire muskets and cannons and boats, all of which were used to head off, pun intended, te Pūho on the Mataura River. And earlier halt Te Rauparaha and Ngāti Toa in their tracks, pushing them back north of Kaikoura. It was by such means we regained control of our tribal territory. In the modern era of corporate raiding, Ngāi Tahu Holdings Corporation would do very well to heed the lesson on display here. Simply put, Invercargill is not Christchurch's poor cousin, we are its saviour in waiting. Now, as is well known, many of our Ngāi Tahu great-great-grandmothers married many of these whaling newcomers, tangata pora, as we term them here in the south, the shipmen, or if you will, for the Australians, boat people. Now, these blokes came from every nook of the British Isles, from Banff and Bristol, Greenwich and Penzance, but also from continental Europe, France, Portugal, Finland and Norway. Native Americans, African Americans, Euro-Americans, all in the mix, as were Indigenous Australians. Our Pou Wāhine on Te Rawaruha Marae mark the enduring significance of this moment in our tribal history. Other markers of this, of course, include our surnames, names like Acker, Bradshaw, Bragg, Spencer, Sterling, Ryan, all now threads in the woven cloak of tahu under which we continue to shelter on the edge of the roaring 40s. Of course, intercultural relations on the pre-colonial frontier were not always straightforward and they were not always peaceful, but mutual accommodation was sought and was achieved. And this period is quite rightly viewed as relatively benign compared with the era of colonial settlement, which began for us in Te Waiponamu in 1848, and which by 1891 left 90%, it's 90, of individual Ngāi Tahu landless. It's a very difficult thing to stomach in a capitalist society, the intergenerational impact of which continues to take a heavy toll. Now, as I alluded to, large quantities of whale oil generated in bays and beaches throughout Whānau Strait were stowed within the calmer waters of Bluff Harbour before voyages back to Sydney for transshipment, but also directly to ports of origin in the Northern Hemisphere, the Bremans and the Bostons and so on. It is by such means that a young Māori boy from Whānau Strait spent 1838, 1 year, living in a mission house in northern Germany. In any event, much of this oil came from whaling operations conducted directly at Bluff itself, where a station was established in 1836 by one of Edu's ancestors. Now, 1836, this is hot on the heels of measles and influenza epidemics at Sydney, which made their way to Ruapuki and Ōtākau, and which killed an enormous amount of our people. The cultural memory of that devastating process, which fortunately passed quite quickly, goes quite some way to explaining our tribal responsiveness to COVID-19. Now, everything I've just relayed to you was a direct consequence of the establishment of the New South Wales penal economy and its expanding frontier, which quickly encompassed northern Te Kao Māui, that other island, with Southern Te Waipounamu. What this meant was that the world of our tipuna got big, really quickly, but they filled that bigger space. They lived in the whole world. And we owe it to them to recommit ourselves to that horizon of vision. Which brings me to my key point. Because I am a historian, I spend a lot of time thinking about the future. Because I am a historian of Ngaitahu and Southern Te Waipounamu, I have a particular set of aspirations for this part of New Zealand and our iwi. This is, of course, consistent with Churchill's contention that the longer you can look back, the farther you can look forward. Now, looking forward, as he terms it, to what we might call futurables, there's a neologism for you, which is to say available futures, is not an act, as some historians might want to do, an act of passive forecasting, but is instead one of active creation, of imagining possible futures. Futures which do not simply happen of themselves, but can be made to happen within reasonable horizons of expectation. Now, historical literacy is, however, a necessary first step. Now, sadly, that approach is not especially common within New Zealand Inc. However, it is at the heart of Ngaitahu conceptions of ourselves and of this nation and of our aspirations for both. The Spanish-American intellectual George Santayana asserted that, quote, "A country without memory is a country of madmen." I agree. That being so, you should understand this Wānanga as an affirmation of Ngaitahu as New Zealand's voice of sanity, but famous most of all for its humility. That humble self-definition goes a long way to explaining why Ngā Papatapu Runanga o Murihiku and Te Runanga o Ngaitahu are so open, but by no means beholden, to the notion of wide-scale green hydrogen production in Murihiku. Its feasibility, as the Minister rightly points out, thus needs to include us, not just for moral, political, or even legal reasons, all of which are arguably at play and at stake, but because of our historical experience and our knowledge of that history and our visions that are shaped by it. That same consciousness reminds us that we knew and we used the Tiwai Peninsula long before it hosted an aluminium smelter. And it reassures us that we have maintained many of those material connections since the smelter was commissioned 50 years ago. And all of that is what enables us to reimagine the site and the province without the smelter, which many of our Southlanders cannot yet easily do. I should add at this point that we, Ngaitahu, are not willing the smelter gone. We are certainly not ghosting Rio Tinto. But let me restate here and now that we cannot accept business as usual. There is no renewal of its social licence, if such is sought, without a thorough remediation of the Tiwai Peninsula. In summary then, the Ngaitahu position at and beyond Awaroa is not anti-Rio Tinto, but rather pro-regenerative, pro-decarbonising future. And we are open to the possibility of Rio Tinto being able and willing to reimagine and reposition itself within that future. Thus, however the cards fall on these questions, I'm convinced, absolutely convinced, as you all should be too, that Murihiku is about to come better and look different. Yogi Berra, the Major League American baseball player, is once said to have made the profound observation that, quote, "The future ain't what it used to be." But actually, for Murihiku, the future might yet look a lot like it used to be. And I, for one, certainly hope so. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe, Michael, mo tō kōrero ki a tātou. Thank you very much for the insight. A wise man once said, the secret of walking on water is knowing where the rocks are. And if we don't know where the rocks are, then how can we perform miracles? And I think learning the stories of our histories and our past give us an insight of knowing where we can go in the future. So thank you very much, Matthew McConaughey. Kia ora.